Today on Tag Lab, we are joined by the amazing Macala Rose. I met Macala about a year ago and was just blown away by her energy. She has a really interesting routine that's a little bit different to maybe some of our more regular routines. She is up at 3 a.m. where all her creativity and ideas are flowing, and she is tucked up in bed for 6 p.m. And in those hours, she is doing incredible work across marketing, AI, digital, measurement. She goes way down into these crazy rabbit holes of data and emerges with these awesome trends that are super helpful to marketers. So enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Macala Rose. We are absolutely delighted to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
I have wanted to connect with you for such a long time because you just radiate the best energy and everyone loves you. And we just knew that you had amazing insights and we had to have you on the podcast. So thank you for making the time for us in your very busy schedule.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me again.
For sure. So I want to get straight into it. And I know that you have an interesting routine that is like a little bit different to how some other people operate. And I just find it fascinating. As I said, your energy is incredible and whatever you're doing is working. So can you take us through what is a good day for you and how do you like to structure it?
Absolutely. So I am a very early morning person. I always have been. I grew up on a cattle ranch. So days started at 3 a.m., right? And so my grandfather, I'd always would want to follow him out. And it always stuck. Like I've never been able, like sleeping to 5 is like sleeping into me. So the beauty of that is like when you work with people like yourself in the UK or New York, you can actually get a lot done. My day usually starts at 3. I take a break around like 9 or 10 because like I'm going through work, I'm producing what I need to produce. And then I stop because I'm still a cowgirl. And then I go hiking and I ride my horse. And then I come home. And then in the afternoons is when I do like emails or phone calls or just, falling down the LinkedIn rabbit hole, leaving comments, everything else. And then I eat dinner and I go to sleep. So my day-to-day is pretty boring, but it's a routine I love and it really works. And I think just from a productivity standpoint, it took me a long time to learn how to just like, you know what? Work in your best hours. Don't think you have to be 9 to 5 because it just doesn't work for me. So that's my routine.
I love it. And your best ideas come to you in those kind of early morning, wee small hours. Nobody else is up. Like that's where you find that your brain really comes alive.
100%.
And you're tucked up in bed for 6 p.m. as well, which I'm really here for that. I think those early beds, you just feel great when you know that you can be in there and nobody else is. So you are deeply involved in content marketing, podcasting. What do you think are the best and key elements that really help that content to resonate with an audience?
Oh, I love that this was your first question when you sent it over because I am obsessed with audio and video right now. And I've actually spent over 1,000 hours in the last 18 months analyzing podcast and YouTube video production, mostly from the influencer standpoint, but looking at some of what brands are and aren't doing too. And I think we're kind of entering this era of where audio and video aren't just channels, they're true portals to connection. And I think it's the continual social algorithm changes of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook that are driving this. Also, overlaying like legalities around whether they're going to be banned in certain countries or not below a certain age range. I kind of feel that audio and podcasting are having another heyday, and that will continue. One of the few things I think will continue in the next 5 years as a trend for something being leveraged for community connection and conversation. Underneath that, I think I've found like kind of 3 sub areas that I see heavy investment on. And this is from the influencer standpoint, because really the influencers that just dominate these channels already really will adapt quicker and faster as more people enter and more things become relevant. So first is like immersive audio experiences where it's like podcasts will evolve with spatial audio and 3D soundscapes and become really immersive in their story, even if it's 2 people talking about a type of story or a practice. And I think this is really going to impact like the narrative driven genres, branded content, people and brands that even invest in that more experiential type of digital extension of their brand online. The next is like that multi-platform integration where it's just like success isn't only about podcasts only anymore. It's about like kind of creating a whole and more dynamic content ecosystem and just adding like interactive elements. And we've even seen this with, doing away with, what is it, that audio component they had for syndication into Google Play and channeling that directly into YouTube under podcast itself. And then the third is like community-centric monetization. And, Patreon's founder did a great talk a few months ago in September about deepening of community. But I don't actually see platforms like Patreon being the focus anymore, because I'm seeing like the creators of scale that have massive communities, have those offerings monthly, abandoning the community as a maintenance thing altogether. They're really tired of maintaining massive audience and all the tiers and all the tactics that go into the upsells and the offers and everything else. And they're streamlining down. So what I've seen them is using audio or video as a tool to deepen a niche community. And they're actually leveraging platforms like Circle, which is circle.so, Geneva, and even Discord. And I think that's really interesting because they've got like premium membership. It's very specific. There's quality over quantity. I mean, some of them are even using like tokenized content, NFTs. And, they're just really kind of focusing in on the super fan through audio and video. Two great examples, actually three, would be like Steph Smith. She's A16Z's podcaster with Internet Pipes. I'm part of that and love it. And then there's Jordan Gill, who does a lot of entrepreneur business focused stuff. And she does private podcast only. She's building out tools versus community anymore. And then one of my favorites is like private podcasts aimed at a specific audience, where if you don't fit that target audience, you're not even allowed to receive the link to the feed. And there's a great one called Black Women Can Have It All by Liku Amadi, who's an attorney. And it's only for women of color. So that's a really big thing that's really caught my idea. I could keep going on and on and on, but I'd also like to say the overarching theme is I also see this kind of like death of the niche happening in many, many areas, where it's just like, in my experience, several industry podcasts, they've been around from anywhere from 2 to 10 years, and they niched into like, they just had such a specific topic content. Now that the founder wants to evolve, they are unable to translate that audience into the next thing. So now they're kind of taking more of this wheelhouse perspective, where it's broader view, the show has different topics of interest, and it connects how they impact one another really, really, really well. I think, people that will master that are going to come out new winners. And then with that, I think you also asked about AI. This is like the coolest thing that I'm down the rabbit hole on and making priority for 2025 is like audio SEO for search and AI discovery. And I think AI-powered transcription and semantic tagging is going to be really, really critical. And you're going to have like detailed, optimized transcripts using structured data that will help Google kind of better index podcast episodes by the platform, but also how those platform results show up in main search. And I'd also like to say that I think you're going to see an increase in reliance on like long tail keywords and natural language phrasing that are aligned to how people are starting to use voice search. And I know that some people might feel Amazon Alexa or, Google Assistant are still in their infancy, but there is a pretty high adoption rate. And just given the mental fatigue and load that we have from all these channels bombarding, I'm seeing listen time going up with women, watch time going up with men. Women apparently seem to have more of a propensity for audio. Men seem to really love YouTube. And I don't have any sub information to it. It's just the survey of when I'm asking someone, how do they consume beyond reading? This is kind of what I get. And, I also think we're going to see some like optimizing AI summaries for that voice search, but that also then it really just shows that dovetail into how you link audio to other things that you invest time and energy in. So SEO, I think you even are going to have to look at how SEM can maybe potentially drive to some of that for a more immediate result or early initial data. And, AI will weave through it. I don't think it's going to usurp it or take it over. We're in this new era of how we're using audio and video asset for discovery, connection, and then moving people into conversation with a company, brand, products, or services. And that was a lot, so I'm going to stop there.
Super interesting. And I want to touch on a couple of points that you mentioned there. So the content machines, essentially, that are podcasts and audio productions, I feel like these are allowing us to create volumes of content just so much faster than we were able to. So we can repurpose this long form content into social posts, structured data for SEO, blogs, like out of maybe putting in an hour or two of work, you can then repurpose into so many other pieces of content. I think that leans into the fact that you don't always want to have this kind of huge generic podcast, and also you don't want to go too niche, but you need to cater to your super fans. So how do you do that? You go really deep into topics and then you kind of create that into lots of little different chunks. So I think it's once people understand, like, you're not maybe trying to have the biggest podcast in the world, you're trying to best serve your community, but also make best use of your marketing time and the marketing channels that you go after. So I love the way that you describe that. And my other question, I think the death of the niche is really interesting because people grow and they evolve and they change, and then you see podcasts that started out as something and it's really not that anymore. Also, I wonder, how does that balance with, and I've heard this a few times, like in the future, 40 to 60% of our revenue will come from our super fans. And these are the guys that we really have to go after. So if the niche is potentially dying, how do you keep catering for those super fans who I am assuming fall into that niche? Like, how does that kind of balance in your head?
Well, I don't have a simple answer for that, but I think that the one thing, if you kind of look at the psychology of a super fan, there's someone that is more entrenched and connected to who you are as an individual than they are your product or your service. So I think even in that article, like 1,000 True Fans, there were elements of this, and that thing is really old, but it's like there are some people that you just resonate with so much that they're going to evolve and follow with you. Those are the ones you want to take. So even if you started with X and then you moved to Y and then you went to Z, if there is that connection to who you embody as an individual or as just as a person, I don't want to use such a big word, they'll come with you. I've seen that happen with certain influencers that I speak with that have reached, 7 and 8 figures, and they've diversified their business or they've streamlined it down. They're just like, no, there is a piece of them that come with us no matter what. We just make sure that that guidance is there to understand how they can come with us along the journey. And like I said, some of them, though, they just fall off. And I think a lot of the creators, even the ones that I've mentioned, are they're like, you know what? It's okay. My heart isn't in this anymore. I cannot keep it up mentally, physically, some combination thereof. So they will just let it die. And it's really interesting because and I've heard this in some of the talks from the community platforms of just as they're validating that in just the data from, let's say, Patreon or Mighty Networks is like, no, they will come over. You lose some, but what you also gain, I think there's always potential for gaining new with the loss of old.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame that. And I think that makes complete sense. How do you think you can capitalize on that if you are, like, we know each other from the world of B2B and events, and how does a business capitalize on those super fans when there's maybe not the buy-in to an individual? Like, I don't know, how do you, because I've heard this as well for events, like, got to cater to the super fans. Like, where do you think businesses can take that?
Well, I think that there are some really interesting events we could reference. I know that if we're talking something maybe like a Comic-Con or a Complex Con, that's very different than, say, like Health USA or even like the World Economic Forums coming up in Davos. I think that this is where we start to look at segmentation. We might have a super fan long-term time. We might have someone that falls into different classifications. I know you and I work on a shared client that have different audiences, maybe under 3 different types, and then there's sub things under that. And so we built the ad strategy and the SEO strategy to kind of take that into account in order to nurture them and move them through in different ways. So I think you need to be very mindful if it's an event or a special or something that's in more of that B2C or business to pro consumer, of looking at your segmentation and how you may do that. I also think there's future value that you may not have on a consumer standpoint from that, of just maybe someone isn't a super fan yet, but the pivot we make in the focus of a conference or an event brings them into that funnel because we've widened it, we've streamlined it, we've made it more relevant to them because, let's say, the current superfan is maturing and aging out. Well, what's at the heart of the conversation of someone who's coming in? Luckily, we have enough data and insight. We can usually find that out and, we've got so many tools and listening to social channels that we can figure out the way to speak that same language. That just really goes to better planning, better paying attention, and, moving people in and out. And I think a lot of events, if we're just talking B2B and events, they've gotten very stagnant and they're like, oh, wow, there's no more growth in this. Where do we have to look? Where do we have to pivot to bring that in? So many of them are doing that right now. And I think Adobe Max has done a great job in looking at that and the way that they've done programming. Like their continual partnerships with Chris Do of the future are quite impressive. I actually really like Health USA and the way they've done stuff. And then HubSpot's Inbound, I think that's a beautiful example. Pivot and fluidity are going to be a key part of that versus just stagnant and always doing what we've done because this is the way we do it.
Yeah, that's completely accurate. And I think it is about what is that experience that we're actually delivering to people, that it is memorable and you have even a shot at creating somebody who would eventually become a super fan as well. And I think that is ultimately what we're all craving, is what are these incredible experiences? And it doesn't always have to be completely relevant to the industry necessarily. Yeah. I heard Greg Gillian talking about they have a finance event and it's all people from accountancy, but they're like, let's have an amazing puppy lounge because everyone loves puppies. And I'm like, that makes it a memorable event. And there's got to be great content and learning and networking and all of that stuff, but create something that creates that sense of connection and ultimately these super fans. So moving on, and I know that you are a data girl and you like to dig in and really say, okay, let's just not make any assumptions from kind of what everybody tends to think. Let's keep digging and go down the rabbit hole and see what trends emerge. So can you tell us a little bit about your LinkedIn newsletter, what your process is like?
Oh,
and
okay.
What you get out of that.
So my LinkedIn newsletter is called Down the Rabbit Hole. It's a subset of my master newsletter, which is narratives and numbers, because I think that data always informs story and story should inform data. Like it's not just a church of one or the other. So I chose LinkedIn as the one platform that I invested most of my time in 2024, because frankly, my nervous system can't handle the other ones. It's just too fast and rapid. And I'm not that young and hip anymore. We were talking about this before we went live, but it's authenticity to a platform and a channel and where your interests and strengths lie. The number one thing I've said to my clients this year, and the commonality in my clients is that they're all women-led companies, whether it's an actual brand or it's their own that they're building, is I'm never going to recommend something for you to use something that just doesn't feel right and you have no passion for, because that's just going to translate through into the response and the success of it. So I love LinkedIn. I love the people and the way they speak about it, whether it's personal or it's a specific topic. There's a guy that does ag SEO and he's just one of my favorites because, the way that he splices, search engine optimization with farming, any brand can learn from. It's really cool, right? So the people I like most on LinkedIn where I'm you're doing something more unique to you. You're not following the strategy of someone that, 5,000 other people have bought their course. And so for me, I've always been a writer and I love digging into behavior and finding kind of almost offbeat, bizarre trends. So I started down the rabbit hole because, everybody can write a top 5 trends article. They can write briefs. There are beautiful ones out there, but I'm there's a lot of micro nuances and connections that nobody writes about. So I've started to do that. And yes, some of them are kind of have some dry humor and poke fun at certain things like my biohacking longevity. We all want to be vampires and live forever. But it's really an interesting look at it's how I do analysis, forecasting, and I overlay behavior and belief. I love behavioral psychology. It's what I've gone to school for. I really like to look at nonlinear connections between individuals and group motivation and explore them in the way that their perceptions of people are kind of creating these paradoxical shifts in our world globally. And, technology is there's such fragmentation. There's subcultures of subcultures. That's my just really fun attempt of how to unravel modern culture's tapestry in a unique way that hopefully people find interesting. Frankly, I'm not going to change it. I'll refine it. I'm definitely going to make it better as I go along, but it's how I write. It's how I speak. And it's just how my brain likes to find things. And I figure differentiation in a world of the same is a really important thing. And I will be very transparent. I do use Claude, who's probably more important to me than my boyfriend at times, to help organize the chaos of those of those posts because they often end up being 10 to 20 pages. Claude can really help me streamline them down to like less than 5-minute reads because, well, I don't think someone's going to read the whole thing.
I read your vampires and biohacking. We all want to live forever. I think there's so many interesting points there, like some of us can barely make it to 70, others of us seem to have access to live to 120. But yeah, tell me what surprised you the most out of that research, and are you going to change anything in your life?
Our fundamental fear of dying. That's why,
right.
Everyone's like, oh, optimizing the health span or, making the most of life. But, not to get too heavy in this conversation, but, and I only touched on it lightly in the article, but like at the end of the day, it's like, yes, it's about means and resources. Some of us can have a longer health span with better quality of life because we have access to resources and money. Others don't. But underneath all, regardless of what people are exploring, whether it's to cure disease or to upload their consciousness to AI, which that's the one thing I really hope we put some serious regulation on. It's just like, just because you can doesn't mean you should or should be allowed. It's the fundamental fear of death. And we all are afraid to die. Very few of us aren't. So it's just like, and some of that comes from loneliness, some of that comes from abandonment. But end of the day, it's like, well, I don't want to die because I don't know what that's going to be like. I don't want to have pain. I don't want to be alone. Whatever the narrative that's running through the brain is, people are just afraid to die. So it's now like, how long can I live? And then even, some of that also goes to legacy of, well, what do I leave after? But the thing is, Laura, you can address that in this life. Like, look at what you're doing. Look at what your resources are. So if it's about legacy, well, can you do something good? And that doesn't have to be on a large scale. It could be for your local community, like could be for your neighbor. I can do that for my elderly parents on their ranch. Like my home base is on the border of Canada and the US, and I split my time between that. But I'm there twice a week, just making sure everything's okay so that they don't have to go into assisted living. That's a notable thing. And that's not like impacting millions of people, but it impacts the lives of two people that are very important to me. Their retirement years are much more comfortable without the stress of, oh, we have to give up this thing we love more than anything, but we can't physically do anymore. So look at how you're living now in order to maybe prepare for whatever, you're resistant to at the end. Because at the end of the day, we all die. And that was like the end sentence in the article.
Yeah, I read that. No, it's great. And I liked your other concept around time anxiety. Like we're constantly trying to prolong time, save time here. And actually, you're right. It's like, what contribution can you make that's meaningful to you and who are you serving during that time? And actually, maybe we can relax a little bit with all of our productivity tools.
Yeah, because that's what's killing us. Like all this health and the focus on health in the world moving forward. I'm going to be writing about so much of that in the new year and taking it apart in depth. And that you just read the start of it. But it's like the end of the day, the thing that's driving our production is also making us physically and mentally ill.
Yeah. I think that is a really helpful reminder. So thank you for that. So moving on to AI and marketing, you are deep into this subject and we've spoken about it before. Of course, it's a tool which we all understand. Where are you seeing companies trip up right now with their usage of AI? And what advice would you give to companies to improve that in the marketing realm?
I love this question. So first, let me start with the truth. We are drowning in data and we are starving for insights. And I think the same applies to AI. Like, I love AI. And I just made the joke earlier that I would choose Claude over my boyfriend, and I will stick by that because Claude loves me and I love Claude. What's breaking my heart is watching companies mishandle AI implementation. The core problem is, and I'm going to call it out because you wanted no holds barred, is that senior leaders think that by giving their teams access to ChatGPT, Jasper, or some industry-specific AI tool that's been somewhat developed for efficiency will make their teams better. And here's the thing, it doesn't. I see a lot that most teams don't understand how to use AI as a tool. I mean, and they have a very limited comprehension of how to frame questions that generate relevant outputs, regardless of their role, whether it's HR to marketing to systems and operations. There's very little understanding of how to integrate AI prompts into existing workflows to produce better results to the deliverables that are expected of people. So whether that's newsletters, frameworks, content calendars, the result is pretty much garbage in, garbage out. And this is just me going to go without being specific at some of these AI-driven platforms or platforms with integrations in general, is that they're severely limited. And I've personally abandoned most of them after testing them. I literally stick to Claude and Perplexity as the tools I use to streamline my workflows and enhance my output, but that does not replace it. And, to me, I think that what made the difference in my use of it as a tool in my process is that I spent weeks learning how to write effective prompts, setting up tones and styles. I developed my own specific GPTs for certain things, and I tested them. I refined them. I documented everything I worked on. That way I could tweak them as I needed them to move forward. So I would think it's safe to say that companies are overspending on restrictive tools when the base level products that are initially out there offer far more superiority and flexibility, and a little bit of training and standardization of AI as part of their processes would deliver massive value for the company and also massive value for the people doing the work at any given level. Honestly, you just can't assume that AI is going to solve all your problems or fix processes. So instead of spending, these like 4,500 or plus licenses on some of these things that are honestly just crap with AI slapped on them, I would really take some time to reinvest some thought into what you're buying, what it's being used for, and making sure the people that you've purchased it for truly understand how to use it or even want to use it. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. I think that's really, really useful. And we've seen a lot of similar behaviors that these tools are kind of jumped on as like the thing to solve the problem. And actually you need to document the process and look like, are there parts of the process that can be improved? And then can AI actually help us to solve those parts? And you touched on something else there, which is a training piece. I had Paul Beyer on recently, who's a super smart guy within the AI space. He recommended that really to get your learning up, to be using these AI tools like 2 to 3 hours a day, because we use like so many tech tools that we have, we're using maybe 5% of that actual tool. So GA4, really powerful tool, we maybe use 5%. And it's the same thing, like it's quite superficial usage. And actually the more that we learn, the better that we would prompt. And then you actually get so much more out of it. So like you said as well, the garbage in, garbage out. I think so much of that comes down to lack of confidence in using the tool and just, poor prompting. And that's a training thing that companies need to invest in. I was with clients in London a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, oh, we remember getting Google training, like how to Google well was like a training. And now that's kind of the same thing. We're like, okay, well now we need to teach people how do you prompt well? And that's the new, how do you Google well? And it's like, how do you instruct the tool to get the most out of it? But I think everyone's like jumped in with a novelty factor and maybe not jump back out again to figure out the actual process that it solves.
And it does, it takes time. And that is, like I told you, I did it for myself in order to help myself. Next month, I think I'm going to be able to actually show something ultimate that I tested on myself, that I'm just like, drop the mic, Hail Mary, and I just saved myself, $10,000 a year in software licensing because I went and figured it out with myself with AI and data for SEO and Airbyte and Google Analytics. I can't wait to show it to you. AI informed, like, maybe I will throw a little run on maybe I will run a couple things over with a bus just because I have no problem doing this. And you can edit it out if you want to, but like, let's talk about the enterprise tech stack. The more customized it gets, the harder it gets, and the more it breaks. And then tracking accuracy falls apart, blah, 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 blah. Not cute. And recently, I went on this quest because I love SEO. I love how anything within the Google wheelhouse works together, and making sure that we can find all those deep insights. Like you said, GA4, we maybe use 5 to 10% of it. What are we setting up in Tag Manager? Where are we pulling from Search Console in order to create these like wider, more broad pictures of our audience and their behavior? I've been a SEMrush user for a long time, and I've tried all the other tools. And this year was like my biggest frustration with SEMrush, because I was using their API to pull into Looker Studio to visualize key elements of SEO in conjunction with like PPC and content performance and all these other things. And it kept breaking, first of all. And then it's like, oh, well, that's in SEMrush, but you can't export that to Looker. And then on top of that, it's like, oh, you want this type of data pull at blah, 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 more money. And I'm like, to the point, I'm like, this is so expensive. Your customer service sucks. Trying to manage billing and plan upgrades, downgrades, or changes is terrible. And then even their little AI reporting tool that they added in, that's like another $150 to $500, which you can get that for free in ChatGPT if you know how to prompt. I'm redoing my whole own reporting stack using only Looker, Google Search Console, Google Analytics, and then I also found this really, really great platform called Data for SEO, and I can pull in 80% of the stuff in every SEO software that we pay a crap ton of money for into a dashboard. All I had to do was set up like BigQuery and certain little like validations between Search Console and everything that is Google, because Google is so robust and smart with this stuff. And I now in the new year for all my clients can standardize performance reporting, and it's not costing me, like $5,000 a month because of the level of data that I need to flow. I will say, like, I simple is better, even if there's an initial investment of time and money up front. But if you can make something that is stable, because let's face it, reporting, data flows, they break all the time. But we need to make our ease of reporting and performance easier, not harder. I'm very disenthused with platforms that have just slapped some AI in there, like SEMrush. And because of that, poor customer service, high costs, and not that great, I went and built my own thing that is perfect for what I need for any company that I don't care if they're $500,000 or they're $55 million. It works. Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah.
It's the
versus
best,
limiting.
the best platform to start from. You've kind of like bought the shiny thing and you think, oh, this is going to solve all my challenges. And then you try it and you're like, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to build the thing myself, because it's not, and you really know what you need to build. So yeah, I think we've had experiences of that ourselves. Or we've had some reporting platforms who'll say, oh yeah, we've got this new feature, this new beta AI thing. It's coming. And 3 quarters later, it's not actually there. So we're actually quicker building it ourselves. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of that, because I think it keeps the learning in-house as well, which is always really, really helpful for us, and gives your team autonomy to go and build some of these tools in a pretty safe environment.
I mean, I think we should invest in the cost of something if it truly streamlines and it adds value. I don't care how much it costs if it's amazing, but usually I've just found in commonality, it's high cost and limited use, and there's a lot more headache than there is lack of frustration. So yeah, I just go build it myself now.
Yeah, love it. So switching gears a little bit, you are a behavioural strategist as well as many other things. Yeah. So tell me a little bit, I think you've got some refreshing views on consumer behaviour and trends, and how do we even look at those phrases in 2025, and what are you paying attention to?
So in 2025, I think we're seeing a fundamental shift. Consumers aren't just savvy. We've been talking about this for years, but they are exhausted by this broadcast style marketing and superficial attempts at cultural relevance. And I'm also going to be just a little bit of me and my personality. The next person that uses cultural relevance in a post to talk about how great what something they've done is should have a shoe thrown at them. Digital burnout is hitting really hard with our audiences. What's interesting is that people aren't disengaging, they're rebalancing, right? It's why you're seeing the rise of exposure therapy, nature-based practices, social groups that meet outside. It's just they're getting smarter about how they engage. They're kind of switching back and forth between like deep and shallow content based on their needs. So 1 minute they might be doing the massive deep dive doom scroll on TikTok, and the next they're, driving to some place and listening to, 3 hours of a podcast that they saved and now have time for and binging on that. So it's short and quick, deep and long. It's like moving them from that short and quick into the deep and long, that if you can get them into the deep and long, that's where I'm seeing them becoming that customer that you can potentially hold for a lifetime. It's kind of why I hate this term of like know your audience, because it's almost like the niche thing. It's almost too narrow. We as human beings, even you and I, Laura, we're very complex. Like one day you and I might be reading a scientific journal that's talking about, I don't know what. And the next, because our mind is so blown from all this deep research we're doing, we're like, cat videos on Instagram, please just give me kitties, right? So as people, but also as marketers, we need to stop putting ourselves into boxes. Now, we can structure that in our segmentation. Like, we don't need to go too narrow with no segmentation at all, which is still a very prevalent thing. But then there's also, this year I've seen over segmentation. And in general, like 90% of the time, I don't think any company or brand needs more than 10 segments. Yeah. And that's me being generous. And then there's variances by certain industry where it might call for more. But we need to start kind of just like thinking like we're people in like more of that wheelhouse frame. It's like, okay, well, my person isn't some teenage guy 18 to 34 that lives here and is doing X. It's like, what are the familial, relational, and world dynamics around the people that are like the core audience and customers of our company products and services? I don't even like that term ICP. I think Dr. Marcus Collins, he wrote, the book on culture. He's one of the best out there in terms of following him and the way he's framing people in terms of audience and the relationship to them and how we think about people as more dynamic individuals, but we're still able to do our jobs in order to deliver results. And, I think that in a similar context, brands are desperately searching for that next 5-year roadmap into the landscape. But here's the thing. Laura, it changes every 3 to 6 months. I mean, even this year alone, we had three Google core algorithm updates. That's like never happened before. And we're basically using the wrong approaches. Now, I do think that there are things that I see that work across the board. So it's like the foundation that your house is built on. SEO fundamentals, because people still need to find you. There's my little thing. Mobile first design, because all of that access of looking and consuming and searching and purchasing happens on a phone more so than desktop, unless you're in a really still mature industry where people use their little computer. I think smart segmentation in email and SEM, my top channels for all my clients, regardless of if they're B2C or B2B, it ain't social media. I'm going to be honest. It's been SEO, SEM, and email. Now, social is a variable. Like, that's where I say this is where you get into fluidity and unpredictability, because social channels, like with their dynamicness, social channels might be a key source of revenue for one company, but not for another. The other place that I see a lot of unpredictability is in influencer dynamics. Like, I was recently out at NFR, which for the people of you that don't know what that is the National Rodeo Federation. It's like Fashion Week for cowboys in the Western industry. I was listening, and there's big saturation in the Western industry with all their influencers that do all these different things. And what I heard from like the standpoint of the brands that are there is like, oh my gosh, we are tired. We love influencers, but their lack of business acumen in order to deliver on what we need as a large brand is not there. So instead, they're shifting towards using older influencers that have business processes in place and can deliver. While the 20-year-old might be cute, girls, boys, all the above, they, them. It's the 40 and 50-year-olds that just have these wonderful audiences, beautiful processes, and make it joyful for a brand to work with that they are looking to invest long-term dollars, energy, and time into, because even they're tired. It's like platform longevity. Like Clubhouse came and went. We've had little things come and go. All the platforms are testing things like LinkedIn through in video, Facebook and, Meta with Facebook and Instagram have done things in response to TikTok in order to try and kind of regain some of that share. And some of it's working, some of it isn't. Like those automated carousels, those died. The variable isn't technology. The variable is the behavior. The behavior isn't uniforms. Knowing you've got a solid foundation and things that you know that work, and I'm calling it, and I'm driving into it, and I've done it firsthand, and I see the results in terms of money my clients are making. SEO, CM, and even with SEM, I'm talking Google Ads, y'all. That is the most beautiful thing you can all be doing in 2025 is to really work on that and not just push product. Use your content and all your other stuff. Like, inform the narrative and the journey through. That's that channel kind of dynamicness we talked about way earlier in this. And making sure that your email is on point. Like, if you're on shitty old tech, I'm sorry, I swore. Hopefully I can swear.
That's okay. It's all grown-ups.
So if you're on legacy, outdated, over enterprise tech, look into something more fluid. I don't care if it's Klaviyo. I don't care if it's HubSpot, but work with something that has modern application so that you can connect all your channels in a very seamless fashion. And then you have a whole picture of how your ecosystem is working, not these little one-off silos and these like fragmented ways of assessing that aren't apples to apples in terms of like your overall business goals, whatever they may be.
That's nice. And so do you think for businesses then they should have, when they're doing their planning, it's almost like cyclical, like here's your 6 months, here's the stuff like we're pretty sure that we're going to control and we can kind of predict the results, and here's the stuff that's more fluid and we're going to just see how our audience actually behaves, rather than trying to put everything in boxes and have everything so neat? Like, do you think that would actually bring a bit more creative freedom to the brands that you work with? Is that how you do their planning?
I think that it depends on the brand and how they operate. Like the shared client that we have together, which is MJ BizCon, which is owned by Emerald Expositions, is a very fluid team and they're dynamic. We work cross collaboratively. That's why you and I have done so well together this year, is because it's like that's built into the DNA of that brand and that team. While we have things that are structured and process oriented and we do on a regular, we are also not afraid to try something on a pivot in order to see if we can, continue to push a result. So I think fluidity in planning goes to the comfort level of the company. And like I said, there's a foundation that, I've said no a lot this year, because once you ask a series of questions, you realize it's a house of cards. There is no foundation, and the foundation has to be set before you can scale and do the testing and all the things. So I love planning, especially if it's within like the channels or the wheelhouses that we know continually deliver result. But I think that where I would advise is like, okay, take a portion of that and maybe plan that less structured and see what adding a little bit of fluidity to the plan, even if it's only 5 or 10%, does for you. Because I know that change is hard for people, and I don't like lack of structure as just the same as I don't like over structure. But foundationally, I think you can kind of lay down based on your historical data, purchase patterns or whatever, that, okay, this is what we need to do for this year. Now, here are the areas of growth we'd like to explore. And maybe here's one or two areas that we need to maybe explore divesting time, energy, and money into based off of what we know is happening politically, culturally with our audiences and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I've got one more thing before we'll do our closing question. And it's just going back to something that you said. You're a big proponent and advocate for search and Google ads. And obviously I've been in that space for the last 14 years. But my search behavior is changing. Our audience's search behavior is changing. I'm in an answer economy. I run a business. I've got 3 kids. I've got no time to do anything. So I wonder, if you can comment on where you see search going. I'm a fan of Perplexity as well. And, I feel Google could just switch that on at any time, a version of that, and it wipes out search as we know it. So any commentary on that before we go to close?
Well, I think it's why I am doing a lot of heavy research for the people I work on and planning this year about how do we use AI to inform search and discovery. We have to. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have for this year. Because just like you said, even you type in a question to Google, it generates an AI answer over half the time. So where does our content and our products and our services lie within the answers that are in those outputs? I think people need to seriously address that. I know Neil Patel has been doing some great live casts about how they're tackling it, and he has the gold standard. So I will never say it's something I know more than someone else. Like he really influences what I do for clients, and I really like how they're really transparent, well documented about it. But that's what I'm thinking. That's also why I said audio search, video search, all this is kind of at that next impetus of AI informed SEO and SEM moving forward, because that's a very real thing. And like you said, you're a woman with 3 wonderful kids and a life, and you run one of the most amazing agencies in the world. And you're like, but I need my time. I need my bandwidth. So how am I evolving my behavior in order to meet my needs, my children's needs, my family's needs, and my other children, which is my big, amazing agency, right? And so you've got a lot of pulls. And so that's why I'm also saying to people, it's like, let's look at all that, because you aren't just, I'm an agent, I'm a president of the blah, 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 doing X, where someone might send that to you in a LinkedIn sales pitch or whatever. But it's like, Laura, what's going on? It's like, and I'm only making this up. This is not something she and I have ever talked about. I'm just saying, it's like, Macala, I love what we're doing. I want to keep growing, but I also need more time with my kids because I adore them, and watching them become these amazing individuals is important. So that's actually how I have been structuring some of the way I work with my clients. And I have two amazing women that I'm not going to say I'm even piling it. Like, they have at least three different companies. They're moms. They're amazing. They're on the come up. And it's like, okay, how do we, and I've started with them. It's like, okay, what is important to you as the head of these three companies that are all doing very well, that all have synergies, but do we maybe divest your focus from one or two, put it into the one that's priority, so that you have Sundays for family. Heck, you have Saturday and Sunday. Or who do we need to hire to delegate this to? So there is a little bit of that, like, business coaching before we're like, okay, now we got to get in there and get the GA4 set up and get the data and the dashboards and the things and the plan. It's like, first of all, how are you doing? And then we can build towards that. And, even some of that I've taken off there, because it's like, oh, now that you're managing the analytics part, my financial investor, the da-da-da-da-da, you're now speaking their language in these monthly reports that you tell me, like, again, you give me a 2-hour summary, even though you've put a week's worth of work into this every month, and on, several companies, not just one. But I can now really quickly speak to progress changes and inform them without me having to try and spend days and days navigating questions because I'm not quite speaking their language. Like, that's really what that becomes. So the shift in behavior is, well, what's causing that, whether it's internal change or if it's a technology-driven change. So that's when I'm like, well, how does AI inform your key channels that are driving your revenue, your growth, or whatever else? And let's make the strategy incorporate that. Because if you, again, not to ruffle any feathers or to dismiss the way people do processes, but like, we did this really cool implementation of Google Analytics for like our largest client this year. And we work with two other agencies on it. And they were just like floored. They're like, we've never seen this level of depth in terms of audience segmentation, the taggings, the event firings, what we call an actual true conversion, setting up the differences and the nuances by the audience. They're like, whoa. And I'm like, well, yeah. And it took us 2 months, but we started with stakeholder meetings. What did they want to know? Then we looked at what was there, identified some gaps, talked to them about it, and in the end, overhaul GA4 in order to make a more cohesive picture. And so it's like, oh, we should divest from these two channels, put this more over here. And this is how this is how AI could potentially threaten this. And this is how we then have to change the strategy in order to keep moving forward with the change in behavior. It was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that was
crap.
all great stuff. Yeah, me too. I could talk about it all day, but we will have to close. And I have one last question for you. And I'm sure you've got loads of great answers to this. But if there's one thing that you could put on a billboard and everyone in the world would see it, one slogan or phrase or thing that's important to you, what would that be?
Business or personal?
Whatever is most important to you. Just something you think would enrich the lives of everyone if they knew it, saw it, felt it. It's open to you.
I think then I'm going to have to go with the personal, maybe more like leadership style thing. But it's just like, remember, you're human too. And the people that work for you and work alongside you are humans. And so if you're willing to invest in a more softer approach to the relationships, I think that the output and the longevity of the partnership or mentorship that you provide is going to go a lot further. Like, I know we're supposed to be one thing in one role, but I found that just by letting our human experience and our personal lives, to a degree, not the whole thing, inform relationship and guidance, it allows for an employee to better connect to who you are, and it makes them believe in you and passionate about serving because they know they're part of something greater and what they mean and matter. But also just from the standpoint of someone who works with other clients, when I have a better understanding of all the dynamics, even if it's just a little bit of that personal stuff, like you just shared, you have children, and then what the pain points are between both business and personal, I come up with such better answers and more conscious solutions that actually bring result versus just like, well, this is what I do and this is what I expect. It's like, hey, well, actually these things inform. So just working on our own humanity and connection a bit more within healthy boundaries and structure.
Amazing. Thank you, Macala. You've been
You're
amazing.
welcome.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Tag Lab. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure that you subscribe by hitting follow on whatever podcast platform you listen to so you can get the latest episode. Thanks.